And if we can have all of those who presented in the panels to come up, and we're going to have answer some of these questions that you guys have been putting in on Pigeonhole. So if we can have you folks come and sit, I'll sit here on the end and ask you questions from Pigeonhole. And again, if you haven't put your question in and you just have a burning question to ask, and I'm going to ask one before we even start and I sit down because it's just funny. And I really appreciate whoever did it. And it's to Valerie. How does one become an inspiring wizard, otherwise known as a nettle girl? I love that question, and there's actually a really great book that was released maybe like a year ago, 2 years ago, called Nettle Girl. I believe it's if you Google that, it actually pops up online, doesn't it? And Valerie was an important part and really pushed it forward, that book, Nettle Girl, which took a long time. I was part of that project too. It took a long time to get published. So you can read the story of a nettle girl like Valerie and learn to become your own superhero. So, great question, and we'll go to the next one. Food is definitely the best source of nutrients, but what do you feel about multivitamins, other supplements, and the impact on nutritional status?
So, I think that's a really great question, and I get it a lot. I feel like, we live in a time where there are lots of options, and you can bless the remedy, and that's cool. I also chose, one of the reasons I started out talking about how I wanted to become a naturopathic physician, and one of the reasons I chose not to do that is because they are very multivitamin and supplement focused, and I think that plants are the answer. 1 cup of nettle tea, for example, is equivalent to a calcium supplement. And what happens with our supplement industry, with the Food and Drug Administration, is that they can't keep up with the amount of product that's put on shelves, and so they're always behind on checking to make sure that those things are actually, in fact, a form of calcium that you can absorb, for example. And so your body, when you take those multivitamins, has to work really hard to break it apart and absorb it, but when you just drink tea, it's just this instant absorption, plus you're consuming a healthy ancestral beverage, right? Water is life. And so it just sort of takes the mystery out of all of it, it simplifies it, and time again, it's why we see people experience profound healing effects from just drinking something as simple as a cup of tea.
Valerie, I would love it if you would share, especially with our northern peers here, what you told me about what happens when you dry plants, because of course we can't get fresh plants, basically 6 months out of the year here in Minnesota. So if you could share that.
Sure. So the process of harvesting plants and then drying them, some people are always asking me, is it more medicine if you use fresh or dried? And when you dry a plant, it's dehydrating it, so it's cracking open all those plant cell walls. And then when you rehydrate it in a cup of tea, the teaching is that the plant comes back to life one last time to give up its medicine for you, right? And water flushes into those plant cells and pulls out all the minerals that would have otherwise been trapped inside of it. And that whole law of osmosis, that's water against water, you're just not pulling out the medicine. And so, I'll suggest to people quite frequently that plants that are high in minerals that are often called common weeds, I hate that word, like dandelion and nettle and red clover are incredibly high in minerals, and when you infuse them overnight, like up to 8 hours, and then drink them regularly, it's like drinking a multivitamin, and your body just instantly absorbs it, and so it can redesign your blood nutrient content within a couple of days. You can start feeling really, really good.
Thank you so much. I actually did not know that. I feel happy about that one. Going to try to do more of that. So here, another great question that I'd love to hear from Beverly, starting out with this one, is how can we encourage urban natives who may feel ashamed of not being grounded in their culture to participate in traditional food events and workshop in a way that is trauma-informed? And I've seen this in a lot of our work, is how do we make sure that we create a welcoming environment where people don't feel ashamed? And so just some thoughts on how we can do that better.
to help people from being ashamed of the traditional ways.
Of not knowing traditional ways.
Of not knowing traditional ways. Yes, I hear that a lot. Fact is, just 4 years ago when I started working with SDSU College of Nursing, we were funded by the Bush Foundation grant. And we did 7 talking circles on the western part of South Dakota. We did 2 in Pine Ridge, 2 in Rapid City, 1 in Rosebud, 1 in Lower Brule, and 1 at Cheyenne River. And what we did was recruit pre-nursing students, nursing students, and graduates, and brought them to a place where we could talk in a circle and ask them what helped you and what hindered you in the process of becoming a baccalaureate-prepared nurse. And we, of course, heard the things we pretty much expected to hear in terms of financial problems and child care and all of the poverty-related issues that we all know about. But one thing that came up in all 7 circles was, I wish I knew more about my culture and language. That was throughout. And these were young women, and a couple of gentlemen were in the groups. And they were not necessarily taught culture or their language for different reasons, and I think most of us know why. For instance, when I talked to my mom one time, this was, of course, a long time ago, and she was in the era at the boarding school when they were beaten for speaking Lakota. And of course, they didn't know how to speak English, so it was a silent group of children. And I said, how could you stand not talking? Or she said, oh, we got around it late at night whispering to each other. Or she said at playground time, recess time, they developed a system where maybe 6 or 7 kids would rotate through and go to the very far end of the playground, and the rest of them knew what to do. They would play tag and all these activities where they're running all over the playground so that there's a blur of children and dust kicked up, and those 6 or 7 children at the far end stood in a tight circle and spoke Lakota. So they did innovative things to be able to speak the language. And in my era at boarding school, it was shaming. So that is a very prolonged effect when people shame you for your language, your culture, what it is that you do, what you eat. And so it's alive and well today. And one of the reasons the students wanted to learn is because they realize that by being connected with culture and language, they're stronger for it. Okay.
Sure. Thank you for that. That's a really touching story, too. One of the things that I like to do when we start a workshop is just share something from my language, our language. Teacher, to teach and to learn is the same thing. So a teacher and a learner is the same thing, because it's also to think is to remember, is to learn. It's all the same concept in the same word, conspewa. And so I will say that because there's going to be things that even somebody who never had access to or lived memory access to their culture are going to share in that workshop. That's going to teach all the rest of us and enrich us as well and give us a better understanding of that medicine and how it interacts with us. And so one thing is that I always make that clear that we're not talking about hierarchical, and this is one of the things that I've seen and what I've seen Valerie do in the community is like that as well. There's just, a place for people to go in and just start interacting with the plants and to touch those and to get a feel for it. And so that's really important, the way that you structure these things, making it accessible, and especially when you're working with, any of our folks, but especially our urban Indians, just to give that access to the things. Because again, like I shared in my talk, the medicine does the work for you, just being able to touch those. They do things that we can't do with our words. And so to make them available and to allow people to interact with them and to heal with them and to ask questions in the way that they can and that they should. So that's one thing I'd offer.
One of the things that some of my mentors have always reminded me of is that there is such a thing as cultural rage, and you can choose to subscribe to that or choose to subscribe to cultural continuity, and one does not supersede the other or anything, but one perpetuates a future community that is not of healing. We have to remember that people are in vulnerable spaces when they come to learn about culture. And when I first started doing this work, Hank looked at me and said, it's really simple, Val. All you have to do is go out there and lift people up. That's it. You're creating space so that people can share their gifts. You're bringing democracy into the classroom for once, and creating a sense of belonging and therefore a sense of purpose. And so you always have to be aware that people are really vulnerable in those areas, and your job is to hold space and make them feel safe. That's the work. That's cultural continuity.
Beautiful. So another question is, how do you suggest that urban native schools integrate traditional foods into the meals? At times, kids have no clue what our traditional foods are. So maybe if we want to start with Dana.
Sean and I, when we started the Tatanka truck, we only served cedar maple tea. And it was really fascinating to see how kids responded to that, that there was no soda on the truck. There wasn't anything that was even carbonated. And of course, your taste buds change generation after generation if you've been removed. And so it takes a little bit of a learning, but I really feel like all of the beautiful wild edible teas, as we know, are incredibly nutrient dense, are a really great first step, especially for school children. But not to plug my own company, but the sunflower cookies that we make too are 2 ingredients. Sunflower seeds and just a little bit of maple or honey if you don't have maple. And they're little magnesium-dense treats that really just taste like a peanut butter cookie. So that's just my suggestion.
They really are good. They're my favorite thing. After I had some, I went home and made a whole bunch and we ate them for like months. I would also say, so I started this at the Muckleshoot Tribal School when we first opened the doors to our brand new campus, K-12. And I went in with my academic nutrition eyes and revamped the entire menu, and people revolted. They were so mad at me. Like I would get, and it wasn't just the kids, it was mostly the teachers and adults that were volunteering on campus who ate food for free, by the way, ate lunch for free, and were complaining about it in emails to me in all caps, like, where are the hot dogs? It was very scary. And that was 10 years ago. So fast forward to last year, we hosted an early learning language conference at the tribal school, and part of setting the table, we had all the kindergartners go out and harvest things like sorrel and fir tips and other things that were put onto the table, and we blended them into like melon salad and fir tip lemonade. And I was sitting at a table right next to one of those women that was emailing me the threatening hot dog, all caps, like she was yelling, and she is a yeller in the community. She was sitting next to me, she's my good buddy now, and she was eating the food, and her grandson, who was in kindergarten, was sitting next to her, and he was telling her, Grandma, I got to go harvest this, and this is where we went, and this is how we did it. And she was so proud of him, and she thought it tastes so good. And I got an email later, it was a Facebook message actually, that said, thank you so much for all the work you do for our children. It took a grandchild to be born to make that taste change, okay? So I'm just saying, be patient. Like, make the change, make it subtle, meet people where they're at, and be patient, because it's gonna take time. And it's gonna take a future generation that you'll be lucky enough to meet someday.
I have something to add to that. Of course, the College of Nursing is not a native school, but our population is growing. So when those students that I told you about that wanted to know more about the culture and language, we could do something about it right away, because approximately 24% of the Rapid City population are Lakota or Native. And there's many of them that I know personally who would love to teach their culture, what they know. And so we started a Wahampi na Wa'unspe every month, Soup and Learn, and it's literally we serve soup because that's what most of us people know, is that that's how we grew up, with soup for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and snacks. But we have an array of Lakota speakers that are more than willing to come and teach. And one of them is Lula Red Cloud, and she is a retired teacher, and she has a PowerPoint about indigenous plants, edible and medicinal. And she, of course, is Western educated, so she can identify the classification of plants and that kind of thing. And then she moves into the Lakota traditional way of teaching. And she identifies the terrain and, of course, pictures with the PowerPoint. Her granddaughter does that part. And she talks about the terrain, where you can find these plants, and the time of the year when they would be ready to be picked. And with our Soup and Learn, we attempt to make traditional food. But we would like to have some consultants that could help us, because we provide the soup, and every once in a while we have to rely on Olive Garden to get the soup. But so that's what we do to teach our college students, our Native college students, about Native nutrition.
Olive Garden. I mean, I go there. It's delicious. Beautiful stories. Thank you. And there's a question here that I think is actually really important for one for us to talk about. And before, and I'm bringing it up right now, this is specifically for Itai. And I wouldn't actually ask this question if I didn't know Itai really well, because one of the things we have to be really cognizant of is how many people here have ever been the only Native in a room, or the only Native on a panel, and you get all the Indian questions? And so I know that my relative here, Itai, is willing to share their strength and expertise, in particular the work that we've been doing at Seattle Indian Health Board around creating a welcoming environment for our LGBTQ two-spirited relatives. And so I'm an executive there at Seattle Indian Health Board, and before I ask them to answer this question, I want to acknowledge the work that we're doing at Seattle Indian Health Board is happening because we did not create a good environment for our relatives. And in fact, there were times where they experienced prejudice from whether it be our other staff or from individuals when they were in the clinic. And we had not gone through a good process of recognizing that as a result of colonization, we had allowed patriarchy and colonization to tell us that there were only two genders. But we know the binary is not real. If you didn't know, now you do. That is a fact. The binary is not real. And that we had a cultural and spiritual place for our relatives from the LGBTQ and two-spirited worlds. And so we're actively doing work. We are not perfect, but part of what we've done, including the dinner that was sponsored, was again in recognition of the beauty of that community and how integral they are to us as a whole of Native people. And until we reclaim and reestablish, and all of us allies support in doing that, that we as a community cannot heal and cannot be whole without them. So because I know Itai, I am comfortable asking this question because of our relationship with one another, but please answer it in whatever way you would like. So the question is, what advice would you give to a two-spirited person trying to advance culturally? What have you seen that has helped and made the conversation a little easier when it comes to social norms?
Wow. Okay. There's a lot packed in here, and I really appreciate the question. I have a couple of things that I would say, and one is that the first one, I mean, I was really lucky and fortunate that a group of women from my nation actually surrounded me when I was a young person, and I didn't have words for it. And they told me those words, what it meant and what was expected of me, and I think that was really fortunate. But I think as well, one of the big things for me was networking with other queer, trans, two-spirit relatives from across the country, really, and sharing stories. You know, I've heard a lot of stories that have come from even up here in Lakota and Dakota country, and heard stories from out in, Crow Nation, as far away as California tribes, and sharing those stories with one another gives you a strength and resolve, and just continuously reminds us that this two gender dichotomy and all this stuff that exists here is new, and that we belong here. And it takes a while for that message to really sink in. You can come to understand it intellectually, but there's that point at which it really starts to sink in. And I also want to say that, our medicines, they know that. They know about this. They never had a point where they lost any of these knowledge, where any of that went underground. They continue to come and present themselves and show themselves to us, and we have to listen to them. And so I'm going to share tomorrow in a personal story, a teaching that was passed on to me. And there may be some people in the room who know the person who passed it on to me. And she's actually Saponi and also Monacan from the Monacan Indian Nation of Virginia. And when she passed this along to me, what I found is that the conversation, because there's this question of what has you seen help the conversation be a little easier. And it is, sometimes it's one thing for me to stand up in front of people and say, well, what I believe or what I was taught is X, Y, Z. But it's different for me to show the medicine and say, look at what this medicine is showing us. Look at what it's teaching us. And so find those teachings, connect with them. Ask people back home, ask elders, right? If you can't find anybody from your nation who knows something that can talk to you about it, we are people who traded and migrated and moved and shared things. And so go to a neighboring people, find another two-spirit relative who who has an auntie, an uncle, grandma, grandpa who has told them something about it, and ask to go sit with them, because it's those stories and those teachings that can't be refuted as easily. So that gives me a lot of strength, just to know that those medicines are there and those medicines have been there, and that I'm here for a reason just like they are. Bilahuk, thank you.
I just want to say, Itai, that you are the medicine, that you are modeling that beautiful behavior of furthering yourself and being a leader and searching for your education and sharing it with us. So thank you.
Absolutely.
I have another story. Just last week, we had a program at the Rapid City Regional Hospital concerning a cultural presentation, and it was a gentleman who talked about disabilities. But during his talk, he did tend to, I can't remember if somebody was asking him a question, but they asked about the TwoSpirited people and if they considered that a disability. And he said, well, no, we don't. Because in our Lakota belief system of being before the colonization took place, they had a place, they had a role in our tribal settings. So I remember my grandma telling us about that everyone has a role. And she was teaching us about that extended family setting that I grew up in. Every one of you have a role. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a hushte, meaning if you limp. That's how we describe disability, was the actual whatever it was that you had. And there was no word for disability in our language. And so he told that very, very well, our speaker. And I knew that there were 3 Two-Spirited people in the audience that happen to be Lakota. And they're quite involved with the community in terms of bridging the gap that exists between Washitus and Lakotas, basically in Rapid City. And it's working. But this lady, I asked her if she would do the spirit plate before we ate. And she said, Bev, I don't know how people will accept this. I said, you're Lakota and we're teaching about Lakota values, so you are an appropriate person to prepare the spirit plate, as I say the meal prayer. And so she hesitated, but she came up and did it. And afterwards she said, I feel so relieved. I feel a lot more accepted by the community because it was a mixed audience. It wasn't just Lakota people. So we are teaching little bits as opportunities present themselves to teach.
I want to thank whoever asked this question, and if you would like to, and are in the audience and identify as a Two-Spirited individual and would like to also offer any words of encouragement or thoughts, please feel free to do that within the Pigeonhole app. You can actually answer other folks' questions too. Again, because it takes multiple voices, multiple stories and ways of knowing. And thank you, Bev, for that beautiful story, because it reminds me of the responsibility we all have to support and to create a place and a space where you say it is the right place to do. And as an elder to do that, we are so appreciative of you. All right, on to the next question. I mean, these are getting good. And I think this was such an incredible thing that Dana brought up, and absolutely has both intersections in both the urban Indian community and in the rural Native communities, is what is being done in your communities to destigmatize mental illness and encouraging healing through indigenous foods or other practices.
That is a great question. I think we all are going to have something to add to that. But you know, I think that just having these community meals happen where people can sit next to one another, especially when they can place teenagers next to elders as they're eating these ancestral foods, and documenting the ancestral memories as a healing mechanism, is empowering these young people and giving the elders a voice and honoring them for what they have. And when they have that ability to share, they can also become vulnerable and talk about things that are a challenge for them, or things that maybe they can't talk about with their families, or talk about with a doctor because they don't want to go to one. But I really hope that that's something that through the Indigenous Food Lab and with the University of Minnesota, who we're going to be working with, is to create sort of something that can be replicable all throughout Indian country.
So this is where I get a chance to plug our organization, our company. Abigail and I work for the Seattle Indian Health Board. One of the I think, amazing things that has been done in the past few years at the health board is the movement of traditional Indian medicine from being a person who was on call to being at the very center of everything that we do, part of the center of our organizational model, our organizational culture. And we are in the process now. We're very much in the process of learning how this is going to look, but we're in the process of integrating traditional Indian medicine into our clinical services alongside behavioral health, alongside dental and medical. And we only have a few test cases of really those shared case consults that are going to happen because we're all going to be working with the relatives who come into the clinic as teams. But I was recently working with a young person who, could really benefit from both working with folks who they could talk to and working through plant medicines and the different things that we offer in our traditional Indian medicine services at our clinic, but could also really benefit from mental health care. And there were some strong signs that that was the case. And at first, though, this person refused, even the idea, the word counseling, or therapist, really scared this young man. But through working with us in the process of doing these things that we do with them, we're able to have those conversations to destigmatize that. And so I think in an ideal way, we really come to understand the value that each of our disciplines adds. And so as a person working in traditional Indian medicine services, we can really value what is being offered through Western medicine and through traditional counseling and things like that. And simultaneously, we are now expecting, and our CEO demands parity there in the reverse as well, that the doctors and that the therapists really understand the work that we do to sit with people as well. So I really think it involves all of us coming together on equal footing and throwing out some of these, these ideas about what is evidence-based. And Abigail's actually my shero on that. Because she's always driving home, well, whose evidence are we talking about? Are we talking about the thousands of years of evidence that led up, before Western medicine was even a thing? So it's really important to bring that into the space as well. And so that creates that equal footing, that everything that we have to offer from the different trainings that we got is valuable. And I think all of us have to work together in that. So that's my 2 cents there.
Okay, in Rapid City, we have it's called One Heart, and it's a campus for the homeless. And it's already been funded through fundraising and other grants and such. And so this campus, it will be about 2 blocks long, and it's modeled after a program in Texas, because we have a huge number, of course, of homeless, and the majority of them are us, the Lakota people. And we all know, I think, that mental illness is part of addiction. Usually we have dual diagnoses of substance abuse along with depression or anxiety or whatever. And so everybody realizes that in our planning committees. And part of the plan is to build an INIPI on campus, in a corner of the campus and it'll be private, and they're consulting, of course, with Lakota people who know how to properly build it and how to properly run it. And of course, the fire chief is involved because he has to think about that aspect. So it's a nice dual cooperation of the city and Lakota people to do this. But in that process, there is a group of students from the School of Mines who are pursuing a grant to build a greenhouse on campus, and they want to incorporate the Lakota plants. So that is such a change in Rapid City. I didn't think in my lifetime I would see this happening, but it is. It's healing the community. And part of that effort just happened recently when one of the city council members went to the Parks Department, and there's a park called Founders Park. And of course, the founders are the people that came there after gold. And they ignored us, our history, our land. That's where, along the Rapid Creek, that's where we used to camp when we came to that part of the Black Hills. And they, of course, don't know that. So it's up to us to educate them so that they can make appropriate decisions. Well, this lady evidently is on her way to being educated because she went before the Parks Department and asked for a name change from Founders Park to Ancestors Park. So that's a good thing that's happening in Rapid City.
Beautiful. I always think they're lucky we found them to help them survive in South Dakota. Valerie, do you want to touch on this at all? Or?
So I also started this work working at a treatment center, the Northwest Indian Drug and Alcohol Treatment Center, and would spend my Fridays down there teaching traditional foods and medicines to addicts, and it was a lot of fun, actually. I miss it. And we had a garden where people would go out and harvest, and they'd come in and make medicines, and time again, I'd get the honor to witness people coming back to a memory about that plant and what their grandmother used it for, and feeling that sense of purpose and place. And there was a time when I remember everyone had gone inside, and I looked up, and out around me in the garden were 3 other muckleshoots. And I thought, I have to go home and do this in my own community. And since then, I just, finished working for the culture department for the tribe, which was just founded officially about 5 years ago. And all the culture teachers that work there have all come out of some sort of background in addiction and recovery. And every single one of them will tell you that this is what saved their life, that this is the answer. The culture is the medicine. And so, when we're talking about how to do this, how to go out and revitalize and recover and remember all of these things, we're talking about creating a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a space to feel love, a space to be generous, a platform where people can share their gifts. And it turns out those are all the things that we need in our life to uphold a community that addresses risky behaviors and, and perpetuates anxiety and depression and all of those things. And so what my teacher, June O'Brien, would say from the treatment center is that our addicts in our communities, those mental illnesses, they're sort of like the canary in the coal mine. Like they lean into that. They have answers for us because they feel more, and they're saying, I'm missing something. And what is it that they're missing? And for me, and I think for a lot of us in this room, we can all agree that the culture is part of that. And that starts with food, and it starts with place, and it starts with finding a sense of purpose and place in who you are.
Beautiful. So I want to thank this panel, and I'm just going to close with a short story touching on this topic. Again, I really love my siblings, and I miss them. I guess I've been traveling too much because I've just been talking about them the whole time. But my sister Colleen, again, her and I were having a conversation, and one night, and she said, I'm really struggling. She had a member of the Chief Seattle Club who was experiencing homelessness, who they had to make leave before lunch, and she loves to make sure that everybody gets food every time that they're there, that they get fed. But unfortunately, he was causing a little bit of a disruption. He is one of our relatives who does experience some mental health issues, and in particular, he hears a lot of voices. And when he hears these voices, he struggles with not doing what they're telling him to do or doing what they tell him to do. And so he was you had a little bit of disruption, and one of the rules that they have there is, they maintain where everybody's in a safe space, and they do ask people to leave. However, they're able to come back the next day. They don't, get kicked out forever. And she came home and she said, I just felt so bad. Like, he's one of our great guys. He carries so much cultural knowledge. He was part of making cuspics, which is a type of a cultural wear from the state of Alaska, from the Alaska Native folks up there in the north area. He's taught people how to do that. He's so kind. He's so loving. She said, I really just hated having him to have to leave because he didn't get lunch. He didn't get all the things that we like to provide there. He didn't get to do the cultural crafts or hang out with his friends. And she said, I felt really bad. And she said, I remembered one of the things our Uncle Fred John always told us is that in our communities in Alaska specifically, our relatives who heard voices or our relatives who would be seen in a Western context as having mental health issues were actually valued, loved, and cared for. We took care of them. They held a special place. They carried messages sometimes between the spirit world and the Creator back to our communities. They were valued members, and we didn't make them leave. And we didn't put them in a place that separated for them from us in a negative way. And she said, I just felt so bad doing it that, like, am I recolonizing the world by making him leave? And so we had a conversation. That's what good siblings are for. And also the conversations you're all having here, that's what's important, because we need to build these support systems for each other. So the next day she texts me, and it was like the funniest text, full of like way too many emojis. That's like her thing. And in it, she said, hey, I ran into him again on the street. And she was walking to actually go to City Hall to talk to the mayor about why they should put more money into housing for homeless Native folks. And she said, I walked by him, and he was in front of a big staircase in this place in Seattle. And he's well known for, and there's also a lot of folks there that will find big staircases, and they walk up and down all the time. And it's because they want to get exercise. She was like, all people want to get exercise. People don't often think about our unsheltered relatives as wanting a place to go exercise. So he's really into keeping fit. So he's walking up and down the stairs, and he sees her, and she said he yelled, hey, Colleen. And she saw him, and she's like, oh my gosh, because she felt so bad about the day before. He came down, and she waited for him, and he came down the stairs, and he said, hey, Colleen, I just wanted to say I'm so sorry that I caused a problem at the club yesterday. He's like, I'm trying really hard, and sometimes it's just hard for me. She said, I'm really sorry. She told me, she said, oh, no, it's fine. Come back anytime. This is where you belong. It's home. And she's like, I'm really sorry that you had to leave. And he laughed, and he said, you did the right thing. It was the right thing for you to do. And he laughed and like patted her on the back and said, I'm glad you did it, and I'll see you a little bit later. And he left. When we create those spaces where somebody can go and get a nice cultural meal from salmon from the Muckleshoot tribe, and those cultural activities where they can be loved and cared for as we change the way we think, because we've been trained by the outside world to think about our people a certain way, and we have to challenge that. And we were taught in my family that those relatives are loved, cared for, and it's our responsibility to do so and to bring that back. And sometimes they also remind us we're doing the right thing. So I want to thank all the folks up here for doing the right thing. I mean, aren't they? They're just doing the right thing for our communities. And I was recently with an urban Indian community in California, and Helen Wakato, I believe her last name is, who operates a treatment center, she said, we just do the work. Just do the work. And I'm just so thankful for the work that you do and the love you put into our communities, and for sharing your knowledge here on this stage. And there are more questions that we did not get to in the pigeonhole. So if you folks have time, I would like to ask if you have the opportunity to go and look at some of those questions. People really want to know where Valerie got the information on the Coast Salish diet. So if you guys can take a look later, and hopefully our panelists have some time to put those answers in pigeonhole.